seconds, stand by. And good evening, and welcome to our NPR Illinois Issues Forum Series, Election 2018, Seeking Solutions. Tonight we are in Galesburg. We are here at the Prairie Players Civic Theater. And the series here, produced by NPR Illinois, supported by AARP. We're also in conjunction tonight with Tri-States Public Radio. I'm Sean Crawford, NPR Illinois news director, and I also host a weekly roundtable show called State Week, which focuses on state government. We're glad you came out tonight, and also we want to welcome to those listening on the air and through social media. We're traveling across Illinois. This is our third forum. We're hearing how voters, people just like yourselves, feel about various issues that are facing the state. Tonight, we're focused on a topic that is always on the minds of voters, and that is jobs, how to attract and how to keep them. So we look forward to hearing your questions tonight and also your comments. And we have a great panel that will help guide our discussion this evening. Let me introduce them. First up here, we have Deborah Moreno, and she is the project manager for Galesburg Heart and Soul program, also a freelance journalist. She's a native of Evanston and attended Knox College here in Galesburg. She and her artist husband have owned and operated a tile and stone business in Galesburg for 25 years, and they have 5 children. Thanks for being with us. Also, we have seated next to her is Christopher Merritt. He is director and professor of the Illinois Institute of Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. He oversees the university-based research, outreach, teaching, and policy development unit comprised of 20 community development faculty and professionals. He also teaches, and he serves on the Governor's Rural Affairs Council and is current chairperson of Rural Partners. So we do appreciate you being with us tonight as well. Also tonight, we have with us the executive director of the Galesburg Area Chamber of Commerce, Jessica Linder. She is seated right next to Chris there. And she became the executive director of the chamber in August of 2016. She also oversees the Galesburg Area Convention and Visitors Bureau and works with over 400 members, ranging in size from 1 to nearly 200 employees. And at the far end of our table, we do have the president of the Knox County Area Partnership for Economic Development. Ken Springer is with us tonight. And Ken, again, president of that organization. Prior to coming to Galesburg, he had worked as vice president of the Bloomington-Normal Area Economic Development Council, and his professional achievements include projects in industries like food processing, heavy manufacturing, high-tech, IT, logistics, recycling, mixed use, and others. And again, welcome, Ken. So let's get started tonight. Like I said, we have about an hour here to talk about jobs. And this community, Galesburg and Knox County, like many others in Illinois, it has seen the economic ups and downs. It's gone from being a manufacturing hub to watching jobs move out of town, even out of the country. And I guess the one that sticks in most people's minds might be the closing of the Maytag plant. Who could talk about that? Who was here at the time to talk about what that was like when that plant decided to shut down? Well, you weren't here, right?
I was here raising my family, and we were not directly involved with Maytag, but certainly knew many people who were employed there as engineers and line workers. I know that our oldest son was very much affected by the Maytag closure, which I did not realize until he became an artist later and began to make sculptures out of refrigerators. And that directly tied back to his experience with many of his friends having to go through that loss.
I believe there were about 1,500 or more employees at the time that it closed. I know at one point it employed quite a few others. That had to be, and I speak from experience because I grew up in Southern Illinois. My hometown also had a Maytag plant, which closed down around the same time. Devastating to a community of its size. Those jobs just are hard to replace. Has there been something that has helped to ease that pain since that closure back in 2004?
I think the strategy that the community has been employing is one that other communities around the Midwest and around the United States who have faced similar economic circumstances have chosen to employ, and that is an approach into diversification. I think the decline in manufacturing is decline in manufacturing employment. Let me be specific about that. Is a way to illustrate what happens if your economy is not properly diversified. If you have too much of your employed base tied up into a single industry, that makes your community very vulnerable to shocks. And so I think that the strategy that you're seeing Knox County and the greater Galesburg area employ to rebuild our economy here in the 21st century is a multi-industry approach, seeking opportunities in a variety of different industries instead of looking for a one-to-one replacement for those manufacturing jobs.
So are those jobs that are coming in to try to replace that, are they the same level of pay, same level of benefits in some cases, or?
It's a mixed bag. And to be clear, we're not simply looking to bring in new jobs. Attraction is just one of multiple economic development strategies. It's also extremely important to grow jobs in existing firms and to encourage entrepreneurs to start new businesses. So again, I think it's going to be a mixture of industries that carry this economy forward in the future. And it's tough to say exactly how in aggregate those will compare to what has happened here in the past.
Jessica, with the Chamber of Commerce, how certainly the trickle-down effect of losing jobs like that in a community struggling to try to replace that, is that, I mean, the impact that has on other businesses as well. That has to be, a challenge as also.
Right, absolutely, and other communities in Illinois are experiencing that now. Peoria being one. When you lose a large industry, you also have a lot of industries feeding that. But what's interesting about that loss was that we also lost a lot of population with the loss of Maytag. So really what we're fighting now isn't needing to replace those jobs because those people aren't here. We actually have, our unemployment rate is about 4% right now, which is trending right with the national level. So really what we're looking for is we need more workforce more than anything for the employers we have.
Okay. Chris, when you hear what's going on here in Knox County, Galesburg, you study issues in rural parts of the country, including in Illinois. Is it similar stories?
Yeah, it is. And one of the things I would talk about is that demography is destiny. And if I would ask people in this room when Knox County's population peaked, I'm not sure what they would come up with as a date, but I'm not going to force you to answer. That's not a quiz here, but it would be 1980. So your population peaked 37 years ago, and in western Illinois, that's the most recent peak. There's counties abutting Knox County whose population peaked over a century ago, and so the question is, where are the next generation of workers going to come from? The next entrepreneurs, the next people who are going to be taking over Main Street businesses when those business owners want to think about retiring. So it's a real challenge, I think, to figure out where is the next generation of young people going to come from that will be filling the skilled labor workforce, the next generation of entrepreneurs, and to be honest, the next generation of students for Knox College and for Carl Sandburg College.
So where did the people who were displaced by the closure of something like Maytag, for example, when that plant closed down, I think I read that the railroad picked up several, the employment in the railroad has increased through that time. Is that now one of the larger employers around this area?
It's the largest employer.
It is the largest. And so is that something that will continue, do we think, or is that also pretty tenuous, just like some of these industries that pull out of towns like Galesburg?
I think that the rail industry has a pretty firm investment in our community. Now, of course, with the transportation industry, ebbs and flows with the overall macro economy, and so when things are going well, there's more goods being shipped, there's more employees needed for the transportation industry. Likewise, when things are slow on a national basis, you see the transportation industry across the board cut back. So I think that in the foreseeable future, the transportation industry is extremely important to the future of Galesburg and Knox County.
We're also seeing population loss in the state of Illinois, and rural areas are also struggling with that. How is that, what is happening here when it comes to population numbers?
Well, I have some that I'm ready to rattle off. To be clear, population loss is the number one issue, in my opinion, facing the greater Galesburg area and Knox County. As Chris mentioned, our population peaked in 1980. Since then, we've lost 17% of our county's population. If you look at our labor force peaked actually in 1992. Since then, our labor force has declined 28%. Those numbers are staggering. A lot of journalistic ink is shed over countries like Japan that are facing, demographic time bombs. If you look at Japan's population loss, they don't have anything even close to what we've experienced here in Knox County. And that's extremely important for us in the realm of economic development, because workforce is the number one thing that companies are looking for, whether they're coming in from outside or whether they're existing companies looking to expand. You have to have a workforce, and so when you have a declining population, that reduces the overall pool of workers from which employers can draw.
So what is it like here in town for a young person who's graduating? Maybe they're even going to college around here, but is there anything to keep them here once that's done? Can they make a living? Can they start a family and stay here?
I think they can, but they have to look at certain industries that are growing. From the economic development standpoint, we've identified 3 industries that are really primed for continued growth into the future here in the greater Galesburg area. We already talked about transportation logistics. Healthcare is another field that's growing very rapidly. And then lastly, manufacturing. Believe it or not, even with the loss of major manufacturers like Maytag and Butler, those manufacturers that still remaining are having an incredibly difficult time finding and filling positions. And so I believe that the best way to address this issue from a local standpoint is to better integrate our education system with our business community and help open the eyes of young people to the type of career opportunities that are open to them right now in the area.
The other piece of that too is that we're talking about population loss, but we also have an aging population, which is a nationwide issue and one that we see pretty starkly here in Knox County. So the young professionals that do stay, especially in our professional fields, see a very quick climb. So there is some kind of silver lining benefit for those young people in that they're hitting high points in their career much earlier than they would in maybe other areas, or especially in urban areas, because there are those trajectories available.
And Chris and Debbie, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on any of that as well.
Well, with the population loss, we've also seen a poverty increase of about 24.6%. So that's put a significant strain on the community as well, and that's where social services have stepped in, and that the Illinois budget impasse really affected people, children in particular, who didn't get necessarily the food and the care that they needed during that particular time.
Well, that did show up. I mean, it shows up everywhere. It showed up in Chicago. It shows up in more wealthy communities, but it really hits home in a community with, like you said, with a poverty rate that's going on nearly a quarter of the population.
Yes.
So.
And you ask about kind of industries and businesses that feed into others. There's definitely an impact there as well. So we have some extremely large nonprofit and tax-exempt agencies in our county that were struggling with that budget impasse, that had distributors or suppliers that they also were having trouble paying as well. So those effects trickle through.
And I'm hoping that we'll talk about both our local, state, and federal actions that we can take actually locally that will impact Galesburg and Western Illinois. But what I would say, and I'm sure my colleagues in the panel can say more about this, but yes, there is some bleak news, but there are actual strategies that communities can take, and I'm pretty sure that there's a promise program that people talk about here, where it's sort of a bootstrapping approach to providing tuition for local students to attend colleges locally. And so, that's part of, I think, the gap between state funding and that more and more communities are having to do things for themselves. And then there's a CEO program, I think, that might be starting up is it starting up?
It'll be starting up this fall.
Right, and so the issue of maybe growing your own entrepreneurs and getting people to think a little bit differently about what economic development looks like. Galesburg, I think, is being creative in ways that some other communities aren't, and maybe, Galesburg can be a model, I think, for other communities in being innovative about rural or small town, small city community development.
And if I could add just one note, we also are seeing a lack of young people in the trades. And so, while we have technology, people still need homes, they need plumbing, electricity, all sorts of things just to keep up the infrastructure. That's another area where I think we need to continue to build some opportunities for young people who don't necessarily want to go to college.
And we want to talk more about some of these potential solutions. That's what we're here for, Seeking Solutions, the name of the forum. And we want to hear from you as well. If you have some ideas or just a comment, make sure you fill out one of the cards and give it to Randy in the back of the room, and we'll get you up to the microphone, and we'd like to hear what you have to say as well. But as I mentioned, this is election year. Do you find that the issues that face a smaller community, what some might view more as a rural community, do you find that the people who are running for higher office, both in Illinois and at the national level, do they understand some of these issues?
I'm going to suggest that for the most part, well, this is my own opinion about this, of course, but there has been for decades now sort of this narrative of must cut taxes, must lower wages, and must be this, in order to be a competitive community, and that's not untrue, I would say. But I would say that at least for many downstate communities in Illinois, I think the demographic issue is a much more important issue. And so when policies at the state level are done that, for example, cause disinvestment from higher education, I don't think you are going to grow population by disinvesting from downstate Illinois. This just seems like a crazy idea. So again, I'm not advocating for this massive increase in taxes, but I would like to have us sort of change the narrative to be thinking about policies that we can put in place that prompt us to invest in young people in the next generation, which obviously would be education, whether it's investing more in K-12 and where there's more vocational education as an example, right? Entrepreneurship, absolutely. Higher education. I'm sort of amazed that University of Alabama is coming into Chicago and recruiting Illinois students back to, no offense to Alabama fans here, great football program, second rate, not quite. Pretty good land grant, or actually Auburn's the land grant. University of Alabama is a good school. It's not a great school like University of Illinois, but University of Alabama on cost is recruiting Illinois students out of state, and then you would ask the question, how many of those students will remain out of state? Many of them will never come home. So we should be thinking about students and young people in the same way we think about businesses, right? We spend a lot of money and we give tax cuts and all sorts of tax breaks to lure businesses back to Illinois or to somehow keep businesses in Illinois, and we should be thinking about students, if you will, young people, as the next generation of business owners and representatives of business, and we're not having that conversation. It's really sort of cutting. People would be shocked to realize that our tax rate is actually lower today than it was at the beginning of the current administration's tenure, but people wouldn't know that by the narrative that's out there. So I think we need to change the tone to think about what's really happening in downstate and make policy adjustments.
And when it comes to the topic of higher education, for example, it reminds me very similar to my hometown again. It was a manufacturing hub, started to lose those jobs. A lot of the people my age at the time, and we're talking very early 1980s, were getting out of high school, and we were saying to ourselves, there's no opportunity here. It's time to go somewhere else. And we weren't ever thinking about coming back. A few have, of course. But for the most part, yeah, population has gone down in that community as well. Are you hearing that, any of you, from young people here, that they just don't see a future?
We're almost hearing from a lot of young people that they very much want to stay, and I think what many others have said up here is the key for them is trying to figure out how to slot into the jobs that are here. Mm-hmm. So there are industries that are very much needing help, and Ken can actually speak to an initiative that his organization's taking on, trying to connect young people to those talent pools. But currently, that is a concern, is people that want to stay and we don't want to see go, but with some fear from them that there isn't a spot to stay. So really trying to help make that connection for them is really important.
Ken, go right ahead.
Yeah, so So earlier this year, our organization launched an initiative called Talent Connect Knox County. And what Talent Connect is, it's a vehicle for marketing job opportunities at industries that are growing here at home to our K through 12 education system by doing different types of events and different types of experiences, tours, industry showcases, and essentially using marketing our available job opportunities in the same way that we would market our community maybe to somebody outside, but looking at our own education system as being really the best source of raw material for our economy to drive our economy forward in the future. And so it's something that we're not unique in doing that here in Knox County. There are other economic development organizations that are shifting to look more at workforce initiatives given the tightness of this labor market. But make no mistake, this talent question and this workforce question are critical, and really this is the battlefield on which economic development is being fought in the 21st century, is this issue of talent. Economic development has changed dramatically in the last 15 years.
And Debbie, as well, have you heard from a lot of young people what is their view of this area?
Well, I can speak from firsthand. My oldest son went to the University of Chicago and is working in Hyde Park, doing community development work there, and he would very much love to come back to Galesburg and settle here and bring his experience to the community. But he also is, just as Jessica said, he's trying to figure out how to do that while also supporting himself. And I know many of his peers feel similarly.
I did want to, we're going to go to a question from the audience, and while we wait for the person to come up to the microphone, I'll go back to the panel. But Lynn Rubin, if that's correct, if you want to step on, I'll go ahead and let Lynn ask her question. She is right by the microphone. And, okay, Lynn.
I was riding down the road listening to National Public Radio, and there was a story about Vermont offering $10,000 for a person to come and live in Vermont and run a online business, and that they would provide them with all kinds of intros to the right people. And then they had 1,000 people have already applied, and they come in they have other ideas where they bring people in for a weekend and introduce them to all kinds of wonderful people and wonderful towns. And I just wonder whether anybody thought Illinois should come up with something brilliant like that.
Pay people to come here, right? So,
it may sound funny at first blush, but actually she brings up a really good point. That's something that's happening. We're starting to see programs pop up around the country. They're called reverse scholarship programs. And the idea is, instead of giving an upfront scholarship where you give a student money to go away to college, why not wait till the student's already gone through college and then pay them to come back and repay maybe some of their student debt? And so that way, instead of sending your best and brightest away, you're paying for skills to come back. There's a number of communities that are starting to dip their toes into that. I just read an article recently about Hamilton, Ohio, that used a housing incentive to lure residents to move to their downtown area, which was suffering from very high vacancy rates, and that was successful. State of Kansas a few years back created an income tax incentive for individuals that have bachelor's degrees to move to rural counties in Kansas, and they would receive a portion of their personal income tax. So they're starting to emerge, these strategies, but again, this all feeds into the idea that talent is the front of this war, and communities are really having to get creative to compete.
Well, we often give money to corporations or companies to come in and set up shop, but what we're hearing from, as you said, from a lot of these companies, that they can't find the talent there. So instead, invest in the talent, and the company should follow. At least that's the theory behind it. Chris, you've studied this. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a great idea. Two caveats. In order for this kind of remote work to happen, you need to have decent broadband, right? Affordable, decent broadband into rural places. Vermont has that. Vermont also has really great craft beer and skiing. So, but it turns out Illinois does too. Skiing is maybe not quite Vermont, but the craft beer side of things. So a lot of millennials, they're talking about young people who are making lifestyle. The lifestyle choice is almost as important as the career sector, if you will. And so people want to live somewhere where you can enjoy life, you can make a living wage, but technology has to be part of that. And so that goes back to where we've been making investments, right? So whether it's higher education and sort of a synergistic part of the infrastructure in addition to education would also be broadband, especially K-12 school districts need better broadband in Illinois. You know, if we're thinking about expanding AP courses out beyond Naperville and some of the Chicago suburbs, people are talking about, well, maybe teach online AP courses to make our rural kids more competitive when they go to University of Illinois or they go to schools in Chicago. Well, you can't offer these really solid courses until you have a really, really decent broadband in every county, and that's just not where we stand at this point. But the point about incentivizing, you know, as Ken was saying, getting people to come back, as the questioner was pointing out, Vermont has done this. I think it's a really great idea, luring people back. There's all kinds of programs where, you know, doctors with high indebtedness are being recruited back out into to rural communities to practice. The same kind of incentive programs are being given to teachers because of the teacher shortages. And so to have tech workers or a broad cross-section of sectors we could be bringing, you know, smart people back to our downstate communities.
Let's stay on that theme because we have a question from Karen Vanaken. If Karen can make her way to the microphone, I think it's right along the line of what we've been talking about here when it comes to incentives, and Karen's at the microphone.
Yes, thank you. So as a healthcare provider, we struggle daily with finding qualified healthcare providers, especially CNAs and nursing. There was a period of time where it was required that CNAs, or first nursing students, you had to go through the CNA course first. So that helped populate that CNA group that we needed to sustain the care that we were providing to our patients. Now that is no longer a requirement. So not only do we see a nursing shortage happening, and as we have an aging population, we also now have an increased shortage of CNAs because that's not a requirement any longer. And then on top of that, we struggle then as healthcare providers too. How do we make incentives available for those CNAs, those nurses, to capture them into our industry, to retain them into our industry, when we're also faced with the struggles of the budget and funding being cut and the Medicaid system being backed up, where people have no money to go into a nursing home or to go into an assisted living. I'm a manager of a supportive living here in town. So to me, we're very grateful that that is an option for our aging population. That's only an option if we can get the Medicaid system to work correctly, where they can actually have those funds coming in. So now we're faced with a shortage of funds coming in. We can't provide the incentives, the benefits that can retain these employees. That's why they're going on to other places.
Thank you for that question. Anybody want to follow up on that or can follow up on that?
I would just follow up by saying what we are hearing. We're hearing the same thing from other healthcare providers. You know, if anybody out there that has young people that are wondering what opportunity. I mean, we're alluding to these opportunities. I mean, specifically. If I could come up with a bunch of CNAs, if I could come up with a bunch of LPNs, manual machinists, CNC programmers, CNC operators, bus drivers, delivery drivers, truck drivers. These are the jobs that when I'm going out and talking to employers in this area, they're repeating over and over their frustration at the inability to find workers for those positions. And so those are the types of positions that we're really trying to help popularize and help draw interest of young people and help them see what a career arc might look like through initiatives like Talent Connect. But I hear you, and that's the same, the demand for CNAs, we're hearing that across the board from other healthcare providers in the community.
Debbie, do you want to weigh in on that? Or?
I'm going to wait till we get to solutions.
Okay, that's fine. I did want to reintroduce our panel for those that might just be tuning in at this point. We have Jessica Linder. She is the Executive Director of the Galesburg Area Chamber of Commerce. We also have Debbie Marino, Project Manager for the Galesburg Heart and Soul Program. Ken Springer, President of the Knox County Area Partnership for Economic Development, and Dr. Christopher Merritt, Professor in the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. Well, we've been talking a lot about manufacturing, but that's just one industry in this area, and healthcare another one, of course. Agriculture certainly is a big one as well. Richard Chamberlain, if Richard's in the room, if he could step up to the microphone. He has a question regarding agriculture.
I agree with all the concern about manufacturing and those kind of employment opportunities, but we live in some of the richest farmland in the world is located, within 100 miles of Galesburg. I'm from Macomb, Illinois. I'm curious about the panel's thoughts about how we could support alternative agriculture opportunities. You have Sitka Salmon here in Galesburg. It's a local business. It's actually, they're working with people in Alaska, but it's a ground-up company that's distributing Alaskan salmon throughout Illinois and in the Midwest. What about alternative crops like aquaculture, local food movements? The farmers are retiring in great numbers now. The average age of farmers in Illinois, I think, is in the 70s. So how do we transition support the transition from the population that's retiring to get new farmers and doing that work? And secondly, how do we support different kinds of agriculture that maybe don't use as much pesticides, herbicides, and those kinds of things, and provide different kinds of opportunities for young folks?
Okay, thank you. Chris, I'm going to let you take that because he's talking about changes in something that's a very traditional, corn and beans, especially in this area and in most parts of Illinois, but he's talking about other opportunities for agriculture.
Right, and so in local areas, I think we should be thinking, yes, about local. We should also keep an eye on the state government policies and also federal. So part of my response to you would be about what's going on at the federal level with the USDA. And there's sort of a schizophrenic aspect to the USDA, although it's kind of skewing towards one side under the current administration. And what I would say is that traditionally the USDA, its policy has been about making agriculture more productive, and the side effect of that, of course, is rural depopulation, right? So as agriculture becomes more productive, that means fewer farmers, that means fewer farm families, that means bigger farms, that means rural outmigration. At the same time, there's this little section of the USDA called rural development. And within rural development, there are programs that do foster value-added production, which are trying to incentivize farmers to do exactly that, to try organics, to try alternative crops. We work a little bit with a little farm, well, it's actually a nice sized family farm near Lewistown, growing hops, right? Craft beer is a theme here. So, but it turns out it's a high value crop, and it's called hallowed hops, and they're so good at it that the hops went into one of the beers that's our bicentennial. It's a sort of a state beer. They're selling into Peoria, and so this is an example of the two young guys who are the sons of the farm family who are thinking that they would like to stay connected to the farm. So this is exactly the point of how can we incentivize innovation on the farm, not just soybean and corn. How can we invest in value-added agriculture? Well, it turns out that value-added producer grants and these other sort of innovative grant programs spurring innovation are being cut. And funding to support cooperative thinking, whether it's community-supported agriculture or other forms of cooperative ventures, those programs are slated by some people to be cut. So the question of how do we advocate for innovation in rural areas that stabilizes the population, we need to be talking to our elected officials, not just locally and state, but also getting the ear of our federally elected officials to get them to think about we do want very productive agriculture. We absolutely want that, but we also want to diversify agriculture, and that's not the trend we're going with USDA.
And I believe the Illinois legislature did approve bill that could allow for the growing of industrial hemp once again in Illinois. I believe that has not been signed at this point, but that has been approved. Go ahead.
I wanted to add to Chris's comments. Another thing to think about in the rural areas is the installation of alternative energy. I think one of the smartest things that the state of Illinois has done in recent years is pass the Future Energy Jobs Act in December of 2016, which, if you follow the language of the act, that act paves the way for somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion, billion with a B, of investment in renewables that is expected to take place in Illinois between now and 2030. And if you are a rural community in Illinois that's facing population loss, divestment, all these these doomsday things that we've been talking about earlier on, alternative energy and renewables is one way to deliver large amounts of investment in areas that have declining population. It's kind of a very good fit for communities that are in need. And one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is when somebody starts talking about renewable energy, usually the complaint is, oh, subsidy, subsidy, subsidy. Yeah, there are incentives, there are subsidies for renewable energy, but I challenge you, next time you're driving across the state of Illinois, this is for everybody here and everybody listening, every time you see one of those windmills, do you know what those windmills pay in local property taxes each year? Somewhere between $15,000 and $17,000 in local property taxes are being generated by every single wind turbine that you see, depending, of course, on your local tax rate. That is huge money for areas that are struggling with tax revenues, that are struggling to fund programs, to fund initiatives, to boost workforce. You can derive a lot of funding from renewables. And so I think as we look at rural American opportunities for development and for generating revenue, that's an important piece of the puzzle, particularly given Illinois' legislative push into renewables.
And go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on Richard's original question here too. I think from the individual business standpoint, we've had some entrepreneurs popping up in this area. You mentioned a couple in Western Illinois. We've also seen an aquaponics farm. We have an organically grown popcorn farm. We have Sitka Salmon, who he mentioned. So I think another piece of this too is recognizing the entrepreneurs that are in that field and really supporting those local businesses. Unsurprisingly, the chamber on the panel is going to take this, but it really has a big impact. So it is really important too when we see those entrepreneurs, and as we in our office are supporting them and beginning to cultivate them. We also have great other organizations like the Small Business Development Center that's also out of WIU, who does a lot of work with them. So I think from a local standpoint, we can do some grassroots support as well.
I did want to go back to the audience, if we could. We have Alex Marino wanted to ask a question. If Alex can step up, we have a panelist, I'm sure, who's ready to respond to that. Go right ahead.
Hello, I have a small business in Galesburg. It's a tile and stone business, and I've been here for 25 years. I'm a Knox College graduate. I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm a citizen. And one of my biggest struggles is also one of my greatest strengths in this country is that there's so much opportunity here and there's so much work to be done. But it is so expensive to hire people because especially in my industry where I work with stone, the workman's comp is out of the roof and liability insurance is very high. So if I wanted to train the next generation of young tile setters and stonemasons and artists, for me to be able to do that as a small business owner is a quantum leap. It's huge because we have to follow so many of the same, rules or expectations of a large company. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do we find a way for that little creek to make it, to grow, to become a much more resource, a much bigger resource for the community.
Thanks, Alex. Who wants to take that one?
I'll jump in here. I think, Alex, the story you're telling is not uncommon. We hear from our small businesses, especially, and in the last 12 months, we've continued to hear continually the problem of being strapped for cash. And I'll get on my soapbox a little bit here. I think it's really important that kind of our call to action today, that we talk to our own legislators and we encourage them to look at the whole of the legislation in front of you, because both at the state and national level, there's at this point not only a history but really a habit of looking at a single bill at one time and saying, oh, that's only a few more dollars to the employer. It's just a few bucks. It's not a big deal. But the problem is there isn't just one bill on the table at a time. We have now with our bicentennial, we have 200 years of bills stacking up. So there's a cumulative effect there. And for the last few years, we've been hearing, both state and national, we've been hearing these calls for wider scale reform. And that really takes legislators stepping back and looking and saying, okay, this bill might be a few dollars, but this interacts with these 10 other bills. And now we're looking at a few $1,000s or a few $100s, whichever that number is. And so really we need to be pushing them to look at the whole there and really think about workers' comp reform as one that there's been some motion on and a lot of talk around the last few years. So you bring up a hot topic there. But I think as a business owner and as people in this room, continuing to tell your legislator what that looks like in your own business is extremely important.
Yeah, I think that's something people often forget, is that legislators especially will listen to what people have to say. Now, they may not always act the way you want them to act, but they will listen to you. That you're a voter, you're in their district. They want to hear from you, and they want to know what the temperature is like back in their district. So it does play a role. I would say always reach out and always email, phone call, whatever. It does help a lot. Anyone else want to talk about that when it comes to small businesses, some of the challenges that face them, and especially in a more rural economy?
This is more of a question, actually. I know that many small businesses will sometimes band together in sort of whether it's a marketing co-op or an insurance sharing co-op, and I'm wondering to what extent you as a small business owner are working with other stonemasons and outsiders to talk about, is there a way that we can address the workers' compensation issue? And as you walk towards the microphone.
We will wait.
That's a great question. And for my industry, the Rockford Union is the only one that I can go to for that has some kind of organization. But once I get involved in the union, everything changes for a small business like myself.
Right.
Everything does so.
I mean, an alternative, and I'm an advocate for unions. I'm also an advocate for cooperatives, and so I'm not saying that you would transform your business into a cooperative, but there are cooperative arrangements between businesses, and one of the areas where Illinois is behind other states is in innovative uses of cooperative law. Right, so there can be ways that you can share expenses if there's many of you together. Sure. So. That's another way, innovation doesn't just have to be, technology. We can think innovatively about business law, if you will, to think about collaborations that can solve problems.
Thank you.
Thanks. We've been hearing about a lot of good programs that are going on here. The Galesburg on Track program. I wanted to hear more about that, Debbie, if you could talk about what it's really what it sets out to do.
Well, sure. Let's see. I've stayed quiet because I think we've talked quite a bit about some of the challenges and problems in the community over the past several decades. But the Galesburg on Track, or the Heart and Soul Project, is an initiative, a community revitalization initiative that really is about touching base with the voices of Galesburg, with the average citizen, to find out what they value, what matters most to them about the community, so that we as a community don't have to rely completely on policy or on our government servants, but we can take charge and see a positive future for ourselves. So this project went on for 2 years. We've just completed it. We are now in phase 4, a stewardship phase, where we take all the values and the ideas that the community expressed, and we serve them back to the larger community to see which organizations would like to take pieces of the ideas that came from this. So we have about 8 value statements, but what we found is that the community really values vibrancy. So that's vibrant education, business community, welcoming community. They value the town image, the good services and amenities that do exist, but they would like to see that improve. We have a very high quality of life here in Galesburg as well. So while we may not have some of the perks of a Chicago area, we still have lots of wonderful restaurants, good shopping. People come here for all sorts of reasons. Good medical services. We have 2 hospitals here. We also value things to do in this community. So the idea here is to go about reinventing ourselves and building a positive future in the long term, not just short term. So that's the essence of the program.
And so it sounds like despite some of the challenges we talked about here, poverty and even an aging population, things like that, you still have people who are very happy to be here and find it a good place to live.
Absolutely. People want to be here. They want their families are here. Perhaps they lived their whole lives here. They've been here for generations. We don't have to fight traffic jams in Galesburg. You can leave your job at 5 o'clock and be home for dinner by 5:15, 5:30. Sit out on the porch in the evening and enjoy country air. You can't get that in a lot of other places.
It does strike me that Galesburg offers some amenities, maybe like you'd mentioned, some of those that many towns do not, but it's a decent-sized community still from a downstate perspective. And it has a lot of character, buildings, older buildings, a history that's here. Those are things where you look at towns like Galena, for example, and you see what Galena has been able to do and attract people in. It strikes me that Galesburg has the same type of setup for something like that. Has that been thought about, ways to attract more tourists in?
Yeah, absolutely. We really are a tourist destination in this community. Deb's completely right. There's a lot to see and do here. We have about 100,000 people a year step on and off Amtrak in our community. Really great example. We are an Amtrak community. We have conventions that come throughout the year. But we do think about that. Our downtown, when I am out at other conferences or talking with other development professionals, continually I'm approached outside of Galesburg to say, what have you done? Your downtown's beautiful. Revitalization has happened here remarkably quick in the timeline of what revitalization normally is. And I think when we're here, we sometimes forget that, because there is this really rich history in what is a small city. So we have the services from the city. We have nonprofit agencies that are able to provide these wonderful after-school opportunities. And we have a thriving arts community, which in a town of 30,000 and a county of about 50,000 is not something you'd expect to find. But we do. We have multiple theaters. We have several choral organizations. We have a professional theater group, which is actually the only one, I believe, in central Illinois. So we do have a lot of assets and a lot of amenities that people do come to Galesburg for, and that's something we want to continue to build on.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been in the community for 3.5 years. I didn't know anybody in Galesburg when I moved here, and even in the time that I've been here in the community, I've seen a number of new faces pop up. One of them sitting to my left. And what really strikes me is that those that are moving into the community from outside, we have such a radically different viewpoint of this community versus people that have been here much longer than us. Because for us, we don't know the history. That's why, I cringe every time we start a conversation about Galesburg talking about Maytag. Sure. Cringe. I have no concept of Maytag. Maytag was never here since I've been in this community. All I can do is look forward. And I understand that it's an important part of the history of this community, but as a newcomer, all I'm looking forward is the future, and that's the direction that I'm looking. And so I'm really encouraged when I see new faces in town, particularly young professionals getting. And we have a young professionals group in Galesburg that's growing and doing some really cool things. Last year they put on a food truck fest. How cool is that? If anybody got a chance to go there before, all the food trucks ran out of food because there were so many people there. There's really cool, exciting things going on, but I think it's just important that we keep our eyes down the road and not try to recreate a past that may not be compatible with where the current economy is and what our community's assets are. I mean, it's important to celebrate history, but I think we always have to be looking forward.
Can I add something?
Sure.
I think what happened over the years, too, is that fear settled in. People kind of pulled into themselves, and we saw a lot of isolation and what we called silos. So part of the heart and soul process was listening very deeply to people, people who had been disenfranchised or just, were on the outskirts for whatever reason. And then we took that information and fed it back out, and it broke down some of the silos. And it's not to say that we still don't have some, because, that's always probably going to exist. But I think the innovation we see here, the cooperation, collaboration between, your groups and other groups is hopefully a result of the breaking down. And it hasn't always been easy work, but it is showing some positive momentum, I think, for the future.
Deb, I think you make a really good point. That really, I almost think to Galesburg's credit and to the area's credit, following a large loss like Maytag, I think that isolation in some ways is what has kept this area alive, because the people that were here took on a very hyper-local approach, buy local, work local, we survived together, and it worked. And now as we kind of move into the future, really now the next step is we've survived, and now we do need to break that down. And from the Chamber's perspective, that's something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about is what is the greater Galesburg region? How do we interact with the communities around us, and how do those communities and counties feed in? And how do we really thrive as a rural area together? I think that's really the next steps.
Well, as I said, the title of the forum series is Seeking Solutions, and to some extent we want to get the ear of those running for office. We want to get that message out to them. I want to ask our panel, if they can, to give us a kind of a quick overview of what you would tell somebody maybe running for governor, or maybe for the U.S. Senate, or some other high-ranking position. If they came here tonight and they said, what can we do to help this area, what would be your thoughts on that? And feel free, whoever wants to go first on that.
I'd love to jump in on that. The first thing that I would tell anybody running for a state or federal office is to realize that the issues that face a community like ours are going to run far longer than his or her term of office. We did not get into this position as a community overnight. It took 3 decades or more for us to get where we are. It's probably going to take about as long for us to get back. And so the short-termism, the thinking needs to go away, and we need to make hard decisions that are made through the lens of a 20 to 30 year time frame. So that's one thing I would say. The second thing that I would say is quit trying to sell us magic beans. There are no easy solutions to the problems that face this state. There are no easy solutions to the problems that face this state. And for those voters that like to pull the lever for these banner-sized politics where we're going to solve these composite multivariate problems with simple solutions, you're part of the problem. Do not vote for magic beans. That is not what's going to get us out of here. We need to make hard decisions, and we need to have a very long-term outlook.
By hard decision, give me an example of one. Just
what's that?
A hard decision. Give me an example of one.
Just the fiscal condition of the state. I'm not going to make policy recommendations because I'm not a politician. I would argue that there are no solutions to the state of Illinois' fiscal condition that do not involve a 20-year time frame.
Okay. Jessica?
Yeah, I think kind of reiterating the topic we hit on, but those reforms are really what I would encourage legislators to look at. And with a lot of the legislators in Western Illinois, I know we have dialogues with them fairly often. And I know these things are on their radar. You asked earlier as well if these are things that our legislators know about. And I think the answer is yes. They do know the narrative. They know in general what's going on. And a lot of these issues aren't unique. Before we started, we were talking, and on the front end of my week, I was with about 400 other chamber and economic development and association professionals from Illinois and throughout the country. And these stories are all over. These trends are all over. So they know, but I think what they're missing and where we can really jump in and help them out is what that looks like day to day. And that's what we were talking about before, is what does that piece of reform look like for your business? What is some workers' comp relief? What does that mean for your business? Does that mean that you can hire 3 more people? Or does that mean that you can build a location that you couldn't build otherwise? I think really illustrating those stories is really important, and legislators looking at how they can make those wider reforms is really what I would encourage any candidates to be looking for.
Okay. Chris?
Local policies, I think that, and Galesburg is already doing a really great job of this, encouraging entrepreneurship at the high school level, I think is a great way for business succession. Thinking about community foundation investment, there's going to be a lot of wealth transferred from senior citizens to their young folks, many of whom are leaving the state. If you have a community foundation, some of that money might be deposited in your local community foundation that can, in fact, be invested locally. And promise programs that you guys are already doing was a great idea, sort of grassroots bootstrapping of your local workforce. At the state level, progressive income tax might be one way to resolve our fiscal policy. I would say, and again, I will repeat that I am an employee of a public university, but the May 1st edition of the New York Times, there was an article called Lessons from Rust Belt Cities That Kept Their Sheen. So it was an article looking at why some Rust Belt cities and some Rust Belt regions have been doing okay, but others have really struggled. And the pull quote from this article said, for Midwestern states like Illinois, Wisconsin, and Missouri, which are starving many of their public universities of funds, the takeaway would be stop. So that's a view from New York City. I don't know if you want to take that, but that's the perspective. At the federal level, a USDA policy that emphasized rural development. Agricultural productivity, yes, but innovation on the farm, innovation with commodities, I think would be, or specialty crops would be great. How about a viable healthcare system for everyone? This would encourage people to age in place, to feel comfortable that staying in a rural community is where they should be. And I would say an immigration policy. Articles done after the 2010 census showed that between 200 and 300 counties in the Great Plains had stabilized or even slightly increasing population because of in-migration of workers from Central America, from Mexico, and elsewhere. Rural America, small-town America was built by hard-working immigrants. And I think a lot of the problems that we're confronting, if we want revitalized rural communities, a more reasonable immigration policy at the federal level would be one way to go.
Thanks. And Debbie.
Well, I would echo those, but I would be very frank and say we are going to succeed in spite of you. And that's nonpartisan. I think that I've seen the power of people, the ability of people to come together, to express themselves, to decide what matters to them, and then to take action. We had a tremendous group of people from all different political persuasions, different socioeconomic groups, cultural groups, and we all got along, and we all figured out how to make something happen. And if we can do that, then that's where the power is. And I think the politicians understand that to a certain extent. I've spoken to council people and to various elected Illinois officials, and they understand the limitations of their role. So they can do a portion of this work, but it's only a portion. We as individuals have to step up and out, and I think that has to do with the silos that we continue to live in. I encourage always people to go and get uncomfortable somewhere. When's the last time you took the public bus? I would say that to the candidates. Go take a public bus and talk to somebody on the bus. Or go sit with a mom who's working 3 jobs and can't find childcare, or her older 5-6-year-old kids have to watch the 2-year-old. Go talk to those people and get out of your comfort zone, because I think that's where change is really going to occur.
All right, thanks. And again, our panel tonight, we've had Jessica Linder, Dr. Christopher Merritt, Deborah Marino, and Ken Springer, if we can give them a hand. Thanks again for coming out tonight, and for those listening on air, this has been another of our NPR Illinois Issues Forums for election 2018, Seeking Solutions. We're traveling around the state this year addressing different topics. Our next stop will be June 28th. We'll be in Bloomington, and we hope you can attend or at least tune in for that. I'm Sean Crawford with NPR Illinois, and support for our series provided by AARP. Have a good night.
Thank you.
we will get to the end of it.